let me take a minute and introduce Tim Jones. Tim is I hate to use the term expert, but is very knowledgeable of project schedule management. Tim, I don't have your bio in front of me. I should properly introduce you. I apologize for that. Welcome everybody to the first session of the Delaware Valley PMP study group. Tim does an excellent job on schedule management. He has done this presentation, this is the third time running, Tim?
I believe so. I believe that's correct, Mike.
So, without further ado, I will let Tim start off. Tim, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, and welcome everyone. My name is Tim Jones. I sat for the PMP exam in 2009, passed it on the first time. So we've had some changes since then, and most recently the 6th edition. And you can see from this intro graphic, we've added a Kanban board and some agile sprints. So we're moving into the 21st century with our schedule management. And actually, they changed the name from time management to schedule management with the 6th edition. A little bit about my background. I've been project manager since probably the early 90s, and I've worked mainly in the aerospace aviation field. And for the past number of years, I've been a senior master scheduler for a company that makes flight simulators, so large flight simulator projects. And so it encompasses everything from construction of facilities to software development, and we have a lot of projects are really hybrids of construction software. We have agile pieces to the different projects, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably working on similar things where you have to blend together a lot of these different methodologies. So I think the 6th edition PMBOK guide really encompasses a lot of that. So we're not going to cover everything, but we'll try to cover some of the highlights. And I have made some updates to this brief based on the 6th edition. So I'll just ask if anyone up front has any particular specific areas that they would like to hear about, or just anything that's causing you heartburn while you're studying for the PMP exam. Anything in particular that you'd like to see. And feel free to talk or respond in the chat window. And just want to throw it out there just to see if anyone has any head hurders that they'd like to see covered. And yes?
This is Don Gauger. I'm on audio only tonight. I'm in a spot where I don't have internet connection. And I had submitted some questions. I'm not sure if they got routed to you or not, but
I did get that, Don.
Oh, okay, excellent. Thank you.
But I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead and tell me the one that you were going to mention first.
Oh, well, it's just where you're in a weak matrix, and essentially the schedule gets hijacked by there's someone who is perceived as being a stronger manager in the matrix, and they essentially break the rules and commandeer the schedule. I probably phrased it a little differently, but that's the practical end of it, and how to try to manage to deal with your project needs when essentially there's little adherence to standard program management principles.
Yeah, that's definitely goes beyond just the schedule problem for sure. And I've certainly seen situations like that where a lot of times it requires sitting down with the functional manager and getting on the same page about what the priorities are. And I think another big key to getting people to keep the schedule updated and respond when they get status requests that I've found probably the most valuable thing is to have the people that are actually doing the work participate in building the schedule activities, whether you're doing, Agile or critical path or whatever, to have a team sport basically, where they create the activities, and then when they create them and the activities are in their own words, they seem to be a lot more likely to update them on time. So I don't know if that helps you. It sounds like there's a communication issue there to work out with, the lead, the functional manager. But yeah,
well, you touched on a good reply, which is to try to create ownership on the part of the team, and so that everyone feels they have input, good communication, and they feel they have a vested interest in the outcome, that they're actually actively, they're active participants rather than you just giving them chores and tasks, and they're take more a passive approach.
Yes, that's definitely, I think, the key there. And sorry, my phone just went off. It says emergency flood alert. So anyway, but yeah, thanks very much for that, Don. That's definitely a real world situation, and maybe as we go through these questions, we'll see some aspects of that covered. So without further ado, I'm going to move into a couple of upfront slides, and then we'll get into a lot of questions. So exam tips, you've probably heard a lot of these before. Do a data dump as a first step. You don't have to memorize every formula. I think it's important to keep it simple to an extent so you can remember the key things, and then as soon as you get in the exam, write them down. So that way you don't have to keep them in your head. And then what I found was an effective strategy for me and from other people that I've spoken with who have passed was to go through and do a first pass and do the easy questions, pick the low-hanging fruit, get all the ones that you're going to get on the first try. You've studied hard, and there's going to be a lot of questions on there that you're just going to know them right off the bat. So the quicker you can get those behind you, your blood pressure goes down and you feel more confident. And on the second pass, go back and do the ones that you marked, and then take a third pass if you need to, which I did basically go through 3 different times. Keep your calculations, especially on network diagrams, because you may see several questions throughout the exam that are all based on the same original network diagram or other thing that you got in an initial question. Next slide here. Just basic things to know: the processes, the ITTO relationship, definition of what the critical path is, longest path, shortest time, be able to calculate the critical path, and we're going to go through that. Estimation techniques, PERT calculation. The PERT formula was taken out of the 6th edition, but it's still in the schedule practice guide, and I would still consider it part of the body of knowledge. I don't know if you'll have a question on it, but you should probably know it. The different standard deviations, the normal distribution, optimization techniques, schedule compression, and then key definitions to include the.
Sorry? Oh yes, please. What have I got for?
Anyone have a question? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Did someone have a question?
I think someone was not on mute.
Oh, okay.
Someone asked him a question.
Okay. So these are just some key things to know. So we're doing time management first, and I think later in the week is scope management. I guess ideally you would do scope management before time management, but the purpose of this was just to kind of show there's a natural transition there. The WBS is the key, and that leads you into schedule development where you're breaking the work down, decomposing the work, and developing a schedule. So if you think of it as a storyboard, it's easier to remember the processes and the inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs. So this is what we're getting into now. We've got our WBS and we're ready to break down the schedule. And so the first thing we'll do, and I'd like to see maybe in the chat window, has anyone done the network diagram calculations? Have you had trouble with them? Are they a piece of cake? Is it something you really feel like, hey, this is the one thing I really need to learn about? So just basically calculating critical path, doing those kind of things. That's what we're going to do up front. And if people are really want to know about this, then we can spend a little more time on it. So please give me the feedback in the chat window. Okay, let's just go right to the first question. So the question is going to be, what is the duration of the critical path in this network? And what is the float for activity G? Okay, so there are two ways you can calculate these network diagrams. One is, and this is a figure from the PMBOK guide, the PMI uses a convention to start on day one, and there are two ways to do it. You can start on day one or start on day zero. It's just, the key is just to pick one and stick with it. There are pros and cons to each one, but it's not complicated. The day zero method assumes a 24-hour clock, and the day one method assumes an 8-hour clock. We'll look at a graphic later that will illustrate what that exactly means. But it's important that you know that PMI will use the starting on day one method, and you may get a question, and we've got one later that will rely on knowing that. So that's just a little bit of a preview. So when you're doing these, yes.
There's a request to go into slideshow. Can you do that, or I forget your reason?
Yes, I can.
But you lose access to your comments, don't you?
Yeah, it's okay. I'll just flip back. Does that look better?
Matt, you're the one who raised the question.
Okay,
You're
that's
saying
great.
much better.
Much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's great. And what I'll do is, if I want to look at the notes, I'll just escape out of it for a second. Okay, so this block, I like to draw these because it helps me keep it straight. But as we'll see, we can also, there's a quick way to do these problems too. So we've got the early start and the late start, early finish, late finish. The duration is in the top and the total floats in the bottom, and the activity name is in the middle. So first we're going to do a forward pass, then we're going to do a backward pass. And in the forward pass, we're going to determine the end date of the project, how long it's going to take, and then we're going to do the backward pass and calculate the float, and then we'll know what the critical path is. Okay, so without further ado, here's our project that was given in the problem. And what I would do is I actually draw this out on my my scratch paper. And this is starting on day zero. So it's pretty simple. Activity A is 5 days duration. Start on day 0. 0 plus 5 is 5. Activity B, start on day 0. 0 plus 8 is 8. Okay, now in the day 0, the next activity starts on the same day as the other one ended. So you look at A and B. B is later. It ends on day 8. So C and G and F can't start until B finishes. So they all start on 8. And you just add the durations. 8 plus 4 is 12. 8 plus 1 is 9. 8 plus 3 is 11. And just keep on going through there. And you get to the end, and you have your project ending on day 19. Okay, so that's the forward pass. Okay, I use day 0 because I just find it easier to add it that way. But it's not rocket science. You could use either way, and we'll look at day 1 as well. Okay, so the next, I'm trying to click to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so, and I'm moving the chat window around so I can see this. Okay, so for the backward pass, we start on day 19, and we're starting on the same day as we finished. If you had, say you had an external deadline, a customer deadline that was, you had to finish on day 18, well, you would start the backward pass on day 18 and you would wind up with negative float because we're a day late. So I'm not going to get into that, but that's basically how you would wind up with negative float, is when you are starting the backward pass from an earlier day than the forward pass finished on. So constraints and deadlines in, say, for example, Microsoft project schedule, that's how you get negative float. It's just basically showing you're late to a date that's been established. But we're just starting on day 19, and we just go backwards. 19 minus 2 is 17, and then the three predecessors all finish on day 17, and you just calculate back through here. When you're going backwards, if we look at activity A and B, if we say, okay, when's the late finish of activity B? Well, activity G, the late start is day 12, and for C, it's 8. So it's going to be 8 because activity B can't finish any later than 8, or it's going to push activity C. So you just keep all that stuff straight, do the calculation, and you wind up with a completely filled out network here. And then to get the float, just subtract the early late start or early and late finish. So you're going to get the same thing. So for example, if we look at activity G, 15 minus 11 is 4. So it's 4 days of float, the difference between the early and the late dates. And you'll get the same thing for activity H, you get the same thing. Now, when you do this for all of them, you'll see the ones that have 0 float, that's your critical path. Okay, so I think folks are probably familiar with this. If you have any questions or you want me to go over something in more detail, just write in the chat window.
I've lost the audio. Is anyone still there?
I'm here.
Still here.
Tim.
I'm here.
I'm here, but a lost audio as well.
Tim will come back in a second. I don't know if he was on a cell phone or a landline, but I suspect that it was he that we heard drop off. All right, message from Tim. I lost power on my phone. I'll dial back in on my cell. So give him a second. But while we're waiting, if anybody has any questions or observations, please, speak up, because if you have something you're not sure of, chances are 3 other people on the call have the same question. So heavy power in where Tim lives, he may lose power. That would be unfortunate. I don't know if he's working, well, even if he's working on a laptop, we'll see. We'll give him a second to come back. But does anybody have questions on the critical path? Identifying steps where there's non-zero slack. Ebony, can we walk through the formulas or put them in chat? Colleen saying float is clear. Thanks. Okay. Tim? On a test, what day does PMI use? In other words, 0 or 1, they use 0. Daniel, was that your question? Tim? Late finish minus early finish, or late start minus
back.
Early start.
If you hear me, I'm back.
We hear you, Tim.
Okay. I'm sorry. If you were in the middle of a briefing a slide, Mike, let you finish.
No, I was just answering a question about float. I am not going to pretend to be as knowledgeable as you. I'm going back on mute.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. We're getting thunder and lightning, and my phone just went dead. My computer still works. Okay, so I'm hoping everyone can see the screen still. Okay, so we just went through the backward pass, and we saw what the critical path was. And so the critical path is B, C, D, E, I. And let's go to the next slide. And I'm trying to go to the next slide. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so the duration of the critical path is 19 days, and the float for activity G we calculated, so that's 4 days. Are there any questions about this? Is this pretty straightforward? Have you already been doing these calculations and this is not a big deal? Okay, I just want to make sure we're not losing anyone. And I see some good notes in the chat window. Okay, great. Okay, so now we're going to look at starting from day one. Okay, so here's starting on day one. It's really, it comes out exactly the same, but instead of counting from 0, it's like counting on your fingers. So it's a 5-day duration, but if you start on day 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you end on day 5. So you're ending on the same day. It's just a different convention is all it is. Now with day 1, when you go to the next activity, now it's no longer the same day. So you can see B ends on day 8, well, C starts on day 9. And I'm going to show you why that is. Okay, so this slide here I put together just to illustrate this. So day 0 is based on a 24-hour day. So it's like you're on day 0, pretend it's midnight and you're walking into work, and just as the clock strikes midnight, you're starting activity A and walking through the door. So you started on day 0, but you're basically working day 1 and day 2 on a 24-hour clock. And then you start activity B going from day 2 to day 3. So that's starting on day 0. When you start on day 1, it's really like you're working an 8-hour day. So you're starting at 8 o'clock and you're ending at 4 on day 1, day 2, and then you're going home. And then when you come back to work activity B, it's day 3. So that's why you're incrementing it from day 2 to day 3 when you're doing the day 1 method. And the reason I go through all this is because if you get caught up, it can be confusing, and it's really not very simple. Just pick a way to do it and stick with it. Okay, so that is the day 1 and day 0 explanation, and now we have the same result. You can see the result here on this slide. We're getting the same result as we got from starting on day 1, the same float, the same 19 days. It's all the same as when we start on day 0. Okay, Now, this slide shows just in Microsoft Project how this would look. And you can see activity G has 4 days of slack. So it's just an illustration of how this looks in Microsoft Project. This is a way Microsoft Project would do this calculation, and it just shows you, yeah, you're going to get the same exact results in your software tool. So it's just understanding what's happening under the hood is helpful. Okay, so that's that. Now, if we look at this, can anyone just, if you saw this on a test, could you just calculate this in your head? Does anyone want to take a shot at that?
9 over 9.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
16.
Okay, I guess I'm having some audio problems hearing, but I think I heard someone give an answer. And so if you just look at this and you just add up the durations through each path, you say A, C, D, E, I. 5 and 4 is 9, and 2 is 11, and 3 is 14.
19.
2 is 16. 19, yes, that's correct. So if you go through, you know, B, C, D, E, I, 8 and 4 is 12, and 2 is 14, and 3 is 17, and 2 is 19. If you add up all those paths, the one that's 19, that's your critical path. It's the longest path through the project. So then if you said, okay, what's the float for activity G? Well, the path that activity G is on, it's 8 and 3 is 11, and 2 is 13, and 2 is 15. So 19 minus 15 is 4. So it's 4 days float, and that's what we got when we did our network diagram. So, you know, if you're really pressed and at the end of the exam, you can knock this out by looking at it. Now, the reason why I do the calculation is because you might see a question later on that might ask you something, and it'll be sitting there in that calculation that you did. So if you can do these quickly, you can write it down on paper, but you can look at them and figure them out if they're not too complicated. Okay, and now here's
Tim, can you go back for just 1 minute? So,
sure.
Thank you. So the float is the shortest minus the longest path.
Well, no, it would be for activity G, which the question is, what is the float for activity G? So activity G is on a path that if we add up the path that it's on, it's 8 and 3 is 11, and
right,
2.
15 minus, right, okay.
So that's where I'm getting that from. It's kind of a quick and sturdy.
On the test, are they going to ask you questions like that of looking at activity G, what is the float? And then you just have to take that path minus the longest path.
Well, if you did the whole network calculation, you would have, I'll just scroll back. You would have, you can see on activity G, we entered a 4 in there. And it was when we went and subtracted 15 minus 11 or 13 minus 9. So we would know that. They could, once we did this calculation, they could ask us, 10 questions, and we would have the answers all sitting right there. But if you want to do it in your head, yeah, you would just add up the duration of that path that G's on and compare that with the critical path. So the critical path was 19 days, and the path that G is on is 15 days. So that whole path could slide by 4 days before it pushed the end date of the project. So that's how I would know that G had 4 days of float.
Perfect, thank you.
But I'm not saying that there could be situations where that, I like doing the calculation if you have time. I would do the calculation if you have time. Now here, this slide shows free float versus total float. And it's just a key definition to know. If you look at the path on the bottom, C, D, F, and then the final milestone, That's in blue. That's not the critical path. So you can see task C. Now, in Microsoft Project, it uses the term slack. It's the same as float. So the free slack is how much can it move without impacting anything else. So if we look at C, if it moves by day, it's going to push D. But D could move by 4 days before it pushed F. So that's free slack. So it's the best way to think of it is, and this was in Carl Pritchard's teachings, he says basically, if you have free slack on your activity, you can stay home and you don't even have to tell anybody. You can say, hey, I'm going to stay home for 3 days, and I don't even have to call in and tell anybody I'm not going to be there because I'm not impacting anything. So that's the difference between free slack, total slack, or total float is how much can it float before it moves the end date. So you can see that this whole blue path here can move by 6 days before it moves the end date. So C doesn't have any free slack, D has 4 days of free slack, and then F has 2 days of free slack. The whole thing has 6 days of slack or float before it'll push the end date. So it's just a definition that you should know, and seeing it visually is a good way to learn it. Okay, so now let's just try to knock off some quick questions here. Okay, activity has an early start, day 3, late start of day 13, early finish of day 9, late finish of day 19. What can you say about this activity? And feel free to put your answers in the chat window, or just go off mute and go ahead and give the answer.
The answer is D, right? Because it has float.
That is correct. So here's the answer. Late start minus early start equals 10. And the activity has 10 days of float, so it's not on the critical path. That is correct. Okay, I just have a request. Do your float again. Which one was that? Or do you want to go back to the network diagram? I think that's from Anna.
I think that request was from a while ago.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I wish I could expand this chat window more. Okay. Thanks. Okay.
I'm trying to watch it, Tim.
Okay. So, thanks, Mike. All right. So, question 3. You're using PERT to determine the expected project duration. And PERT assumes that activity completion time follows what type of distribution? And again, they've taken PERT out of the latest edition, so I don't know how many questions you're going to get on PERT, but it's just another fact to know. It's the beta distribution. Okay, question 4.
Tim, do you have a PERT example?
We've got some additional questions that involve PERT, so we will hit some more of them.
Thanks.
Okay, so here's one. Your managing project includes a system architect at 50%, 3 developers assigned at 100%. 3 developers are each assigned to several activities, all overlap to some degree. You have a hard completion deadline. You need to adjust your resource assignments to better balance the workload of these developers, but you must still meet the agreed upon deadline. You will most likely use which technique to balance the developer's workload?
Resource leveling.
Okay.
Resource leveling.
That would be one option. And on this particular question, and this is one of those questions that you're given a lot of information and you have to sift through it all. And that's one thing to look for on the exams is when you'll get a question that's very wordy and you have to pick out the pertinent information. In this question, the thing that doesn't necessarily jump out at you, excuse me, but you must still meet the agreed upon deadline. So you can't push the end date. And so the answer, and I'm having, okay, there I go. Okay, so if we do leveling, that could change the critical path and it could extend the completion date. So because it says we don't want to, we can't push the end date, we would be looking at resource smoothing, and it doesn't change the critical path. It's, and getting back to the float issue, it's smoothing the resources out within their allowable float. So optimizing them within the amount of float that's available, so you're not pushing the end date. So that's a distinction that's worth being aware of, is the difference between leveling and smoothing. And of course, crashing, that'll increase cost, and fast tracking would be putting more work in parallel, not less. We're trying to deconflict some of that parallel work, not put it more in parallel. So I think for this one, smoothing would be the best answer. And that's another thing, when you're doing the exam, you get questions where you could say, there's 2 or 3 answers that I think they all might be okay, but you got to decide which one is the best answer. So there could be, a couple of answers. I mean, generally, I think you can usually rule like 2 of them out. And, but then you might have 2 that either one maybe could be the right one. So you kind of have to decide which one is the more appropriate or the best answer. Okay. Okay, here's a good one. Activity has a pessimistic estimate of 36 days, most likely estimate of 17 days, and optimistic estimate of 6 days. What is the expected duration for this activity? And this, I think, gets us back to the PERT calculation. So here's the PERT calculation here. So you would get 18.3 days by using, by calculating the expected value using the PERT equation. Okay.
Tim, you want to walk through that calculation? I mean, that was a little quick.
Yeah, so we've got our, I'm just moving this chat window around a little bit. Okay, so we've got the equation down here. So we've got our optimistic of 6 days and our most likely of 17 days and our pessimistic estimate of 36 days. And the key thing about PERT is you're weighting the most likely with a factor of 4. So you're weighting it toward the most likely estimate. And then since we actually have 6 weights, so to speak, in the numerator, we're dividing by 6. So it's basically averaging the 3 estimates, but weighting the most likely by a factor of 4. And dividing, and then you get 18.3 days. Okay, and then it's good
Tim,
to know.
there's a question. How would you know whether to use PERT or a triangular distribution?
Well, I think it's going to be the context of the question. That's a good question because, yeah, and I think Lee's giving a good reply there. Material said to assume triangle and less probability is mentioned, and I think that's probably good advice because they did take the PERT equation out of the 6th edition. It was in the 5th edition, and they took it out of the 6th. So I would say unless you have a reason to, you probably want to assume triangle. 3-point estimate. Yeah, thank you, Lee. Oh, okay, so I went past this. Okay, so it's a calculation for standard deviation, and I'm going, okay. So there's the formula for standard deviation. You get a question like that, you should know the formula. Okay, so here's one. Project A has an expected duration of 48 days, standard deviation of 4 days. What is the probability of completing the project in 48 days? Okay, so it's kind of a trick question. It would be 50% because 48 days is the expected duration, so that's going to be 50% probability of completing it, the expected duration if we're looking at a normal distribution. Sorry, is there a question?
Yeah, I'm confused.
Okay, let's see if we can help. So the expected duration would be sitting right at the top of the curve here, and so there's a 50% probability of completing it here. In fact, there's another chart that I have that shows the cumulative probability up to this point. So if you added 34, 13, 2.1, you get 50%. And the cumulative probability goes up as you go toward the end of the curve. Maybe when we get to this chart, I think it's a couple of slides away, it might make more sense. Now let's go on, and then I think this graph that I have a couple of slides forward will maybe make that more clear. Okay, so similar question. Project A has an expected duration of 48 days, standard deviation of 4 days. What's the probability of completing the project within 52 days? And so the key to this one is knowing that 4 days is the standard deviation, so 48 plus 4 is 52. That's one standard deviation. And so if you look at one standard deviation, it would be 50%. And then if you go one standard deviation, you're capturing another 34.1%. So that would mean that you would have an 84.1% chance of completing it in 52 days. So within that distribution, the further out you go towards a longer duration, the higher your chance of completing within that time period is.
So this is Jackie. So what is the actual formula? If we don't have this bell curve in front of us,
yeah, it's just so.
How are we plugging the numbers?
Yeah, I'm going to real quick go back to. If I can escape out of this. For some reason, well, there's the bell curve. Okay, there I go. Okay, so let's go back up here. So it's just, you really don't have to, have a degree in stat to do this, but it's just basically knowing. On this slide here, we have, one standard deviation, 2 standard deviation, 3 standard deviation. It's good to know how much of the curve you're capturing with each additional standard deviation, each sigma away from the expected value, each standard deviation away from the expected value. So it's just basically, I would know these 3 and then just maybe work a couple problems like that.
And so this is under the PERT calculation, according to the slide that we're looking at now, which is not even included in the 6th edition. So we may or may not get a question like this.
you may or may not get it, although there are, I've looked at a couple of, current study guides, and I'm still seeing questions like this where you're asked to know about the standard deviations in the normal distribution. So I would be aware of it. I wouldn't obsess over it and get too wound around the axle, but I would just be aware of these percentages associated with the different standard deviations.
Okay. And then being aware of them, and then, what percentage of questions might be like this?
I don't think you're going to see a lot of questions like this. I think it's
okay.
one that could I don't know for sure what you're going to see, but I don't think this is going to be a huge part of the exam. I think it's important to know, though. Now, this next slide has bell curve standard distribution, and then down here it's got the cumulative percent. So here, this might be a little clearer. So if you're looking at this, I mean, a lot of times they assume a normal distribution, and we know it's not perfect, but I mean, that's a lot of times we're assuming a normal distribution. And so if you look at the cumulative percent down here on the bottom, you can see 50%, yeah, it's the expected value. And if you go one standard deviation up right here, and you're getting that 34.1% or 84.1. So it's the see 84.1, that's the cumulative. So when you get to the extreme of your estimate, then eventually you're going to capture 99% with 3 sigma. It's just good to have the familiarity and kind of know what those numbers are, but I wouldn't get wound around the axle with getting too heavy into the statistics. Okay, and we may have a couple more so here's another example. We'll kind of go through these quickly so we get on to some of the other ones. But activity has a pessimistic estimate of 36 days, most likely 17 days, optimistic of 6 days. What's probability will be completed within 14 to 24 days? Yeah, this is another PERD question. So again, it's calculating the expected value, and then the standard deviation is 5. So you wind up seeing that plus or minus 1 is 13 to 23 days, plus or minus 1 standard deviation, which corresponds to the 68.2% probability, which is the answer. So these questions have been pretty, this was a pretty common question on a lot of different, study, all the different popular PMP study guides. And so again, I'm not sure if they are making a hard turn away from doing these kind of questions. I mean, it's true, the PERD is not used that often, so I wouldn't get too wound around the axle about it. Okay, during a team planning meeting, a team member says that a particular activity is required to complete an in-house work package must continue until another activity in the same work package has been completed. The best way to describe the precedence relationship is what? Okay, and we have a finish to finish answer, and that is correct. Okay, so it's just basically describing what finish to finish is using English, and Matt got that one right. Thanks, Matt. Okay, the most commonly used type of precedence relationship is, and you definitely want to know this one, and this can be a tricky one. Okay, so we have Matt, finish to start, and that is correct. And this is one where a lot of people will say start to finish because it makes sense to say start to finish. That's the way we do things. We start and then we finish, but that's a trap you don't want to fall into. It's an easy question. So make sure you know that start to finish is rarely used. And So here are the different relationship types, and I'm moving my chat window around so I can see this. Okay, so finish to start, natural relationship. You dig the foundation before you can pour the concrete. We talked about start to finish. That's very rarely used, if ever. Activity B can't finish until activity A starts. So if you have an old computer system that can't be taken offline until the new one comes online, then the start of the new one is driving the finish of the old one. So that's another example would be, you don't, the start of an exam drives the finish of study. So you're going to study right up to the last minute. So it's rarely used. Start to start, the one start is driven by the other start. That's pretty self-explanatory. Finish to finish, same thing. One activity can't finish until the other one finishes. Okay. Any questions about the relationship types? The main thing is just make sure you know that finish to start is the most common one, and start to finish is rarely used. Okay. Okay. Activity has an early start of the 9th, late start of the 18th. Duration is 4 days. Assuming all days are work days, what information can we conclude about this activity? Okay. Let's look at the answer. We'll kind of walk through this. Okay, so here's where you need to know that if it's a PMI question, they're going to use the day 1 convention. So it's 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's 4 days. You're not saying 9 and 4 is 13. You're saying 9 and 4. It's 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's, if you got a question like this, you would want to use the day 1 convention if it's a question that assumes one way or the other. And so you can, based on the information given, you can calculate all this stuff. The total float is 8 days. Eliminate total float equals 9. Late finish is the 20th. We know it's the 21st. So it's, I guess you could call it a trick question in a way, but it just illustrates the differences between the two methods. So the early finish date is on the 12th. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, could you go back to the question again?
Sure. This one's always a tricky one, and I'm having trouble going back now for some reason. I'm not sure why this isn't letting me. Okay, there we go. Okay, and I have another question.
So how do we know the 21 from the question?
Okay. Okay, so the answer said the late finish is the 20th, and when we calculated this, we said
okay. Sorry, I understand it now. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I get it.
Okay. No, please ask. I'm really glad when people ask questions, because then I know, we're connecting. So. Yeah, and I have a question from Alex. So PMI will always use the day 1 convention. Yes, they will use the day 1 convention. And when you're doing these calculations, it's probably a good idea to use day 1. I use day 0 because I find it easier, but it's good to know that PMI will use day 1.
Can you use day 0 to answer this question?
Not really, because you're already given all this stuff, and so if we're calculating it ourselves, we can use either method. But if if it's just looking at one block like this, one activity, then to get this question right, you would have had to have known that you're in the middle of this network, so you're on day 9 already. So you would have to know to use the day 1 convention to answer this one correctly.
Okay,
now,
thank you.
having looked at this, I will say that you know, from all my experience and knowledge, PMI is not out to trick you. They're not out to trick you. They're out to give you a fair test. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is a trick question, but it's just one that's good to be aware of, you know, how these things are calculated, and you can make this something that's easy for you on the exam rather than something that's hard. Okay. Okay, you're the manager of a construction project involving the development of a new sewer system. Your contract requires the use of special piping for corrosion. This pipe should be resting around for 10 days before any other activity can proceed. So this 10-day period would be known as what?
Lead.
Okay, so I have lead and I have B, so I have a couple answers that say lead. So the key is, so it's resting in the ground for 10 days. So we've got to wait. So the successor has to be delayed for 10 days. So it's actually going to be lag in this case because we've got to wait for 10 days. And the key thing with lag is that there's no work associated with it. The classic answer of when is appropriate time to use lag would be waiting for paint to dry, waiting for the pipe to sit in the ground. If there's no work associated with it, then lag, it's appropriate to use lag. It's not appropriate to use lag to replace actual work. Okay, so, and the reason I crossed out some of these and did some of this is just to kind of give you that thought process that you can try to eliminate. So slack, that's the same as float. You can eliminate that one. Lead, that's the amount of time the successor could be advanced. So we would be starting earlier, not later. And then float, that's, we know nothing about how the end date is going to be affected by this. So float's not a valid answer. So you can actually eliminate some of these answers pretty quickly. Okay, project manager of a software firm, your client would like you to complete your project 4 months earlier than the agreed upon date, while keeping the scope unchanged. You feel that it's possible to achieve the target by overlapping a few of the project activities. So what would your planning approach be known as? Okay, looks like we have a bunch of votes for fast tracking. Oh. And that is the correct answer. So we got a bunch of correct answers on this one. And the word overlapping, that's the key that we're talking about fast tracking, overlapping tasks. And you would incur greater risk in doing that, but you could get done quicker. Okay, which of the processes below includes asking your team members for time estimates as well as reaching an agreement on the calendar date for each of the activities?
Sequence activity? Or
okay, we've got a couple different answers. We've got A was probably the winner, and that is the answer. So yeah, I've updated these. Some of these diagrams changed a little bit, so I've put new ones in the briefing package here from the 6th edition. So yeah, it's developed schedule. Okay, what is the duration of a milestone? Okay, Matt has it right. And that's the definition. That's in the PMBOK guide. I didn't reference it, but that's the definition of a milestone at 0 duration. Okay. The project management plan involves a very long project schedule. If you're given the opportunity to hire consultants at an additional cost, what would be the best step to take if you do have that opportunity?
Crashing the project?
Okay, so we got a couple of C's here, but it is going to be crash the project. So a good answer. So the key to that one is we're bringing in additional resources. We've been given the opportunity to spend more money, so we can shorten the project by putting more resources on the project. So that's going to increase cost. We've been given the green light to do that. Okay. Your boss enters your office and is concerned about that a particular activity will delay the delivery of the project. So here's a key thing that any project manager could relate to. So what's the best thing to do if your boss comes in and he's concerned about a particular activity, keeping him up at night?
A.
Okay, that's very, very good answer, and we got a bunch of them. So yeah, I mean that's the first thing. A lot of times there's a concern about one activity or another, and if you have a good, valid schedule network, if you have that type of schedule, then you really want to look at that first. Is it really going to push push the end date? Is it really going to cause a delay, or does it have a lot of float? So yeah, is it on the critical path? Okay, discussing your project with manager, you determine the project schedule is the most flexible and the scope is the least flexible. If expenditures are fixed, what is the best thing to do? And we have an A.
Level the resources.
Okay, that is correct. Looks like we got a couple of correct answers. And this was one, I believe one of the attendees from last time provided this one. So it's a triple constraint. The project schedule is most flexible. Project could continue several months past the original forecast. Especially true as it has an inflexible scope. So leveling resources will ensure the monthly costs don't exceed the allowable amount.
That's a real good application of triple constraints.
Yes, that's a good one. And that's one I think you should expect to see a lot of those real world type scenarios, because it's not the capital exam. So that really is a good one. Okay, which of the following dependencies generally involve a precedence relationship between project activities and are usually within the control of the project team? Okay,
internal?
Yep, that's going to be internal. And that's pretty much the definition. It's good to know the definitions. Okay, I kind of gave that one away, didn't I? Okay, you've been assigned as project manager for a software development project. You have very little information in this area, but you've worked on similar projects. So you can estimate the project cost and duration using historical data. Which type of estimating technique are you using?
Analogous?
Okay, that is correct. And again, it's knowing the definitions. I'm not doing too well here with the click, so I'm giving all these answers away. Okay, which of the following is a key input to define activities? And that's just knowing the ITTO. Okay, so here's going back to our calculations again. Based on the following table, if you need to shorten the duration of the project, which activity would you try to shorten? This one, it looks a little bit different than the other one, but how would you approach this if you were just given a table like this? I think it would probably scare me a little bit if I saw this, and then once you start to read through it, you can actually put together a diagram. Let's take a look. Okay, so first you need to draw the network diagram, find the critical path. So the network diagram would be the table below. So these are the paths based on the logic they gave you. And you have the duration of each one. So the thing you don't want to do is you don't want to just look at the activity with the longest duration, because that might not be on a critical path. So activity D had the longest duration at 10 weeks, but it's not on the critical path. So C and H are on the critical path, and C is the earlier one. So you would probably want to you want to shorten C to bring your end date in. Okay. Project manager realizes that the work required to produce some of his project's future deliverables cannot be broken down into detailed activities until more information is available. Which of the following tools and techniques is most appropriate in this situation? And let's see, is that Kelly? It says D, okay. So let's take a look. And that is the correct answer. So rolling wave planning. And I think that's really consistent with, a more adaptive approach where you're not trying to plan everything out up front. And that can apply to agile or critical path scheduling. Either way, it's just the planning when you have enough information to plan at the right level of detail. Okay, so here's another long question. Your company is managing a large-scale infrastructure project that comprises development of instructional software and hardware, installation, and training facilities that will be constructed at multiple sites. So the complete system will be delivered in site-based increments. The customer is flexible on when each increment needs to be completed, but there's a hard deadline to complete the entire project within 4 years. The life cycle approach for this program will most likely be what type
predictive.
Of overall, pardon me?
A, predictive.
Okay. Okay, and I see Jackie's back in audio. Okay, so this one, we're going to say hybrid because we have elements of, we've got a long-term deadline, a 4-year deadline. So when you've got a hard deadline, you're looking at more of a predictive type overall roadmap. But then within that big, time frame, you've got software, you've got different things happening that are going to be delivered in increments that the customer is flexible in the delivery of those increments. So that suggests a more adaptive. So it's really, there's elements of, predictive is correct, but also there's going to be adaptive pieces to it too, because we're doing increments that are not, you know, necessarily fixed. They may be more feature based, that were driven more by producing an increment of capability. So it's just one question that touches on some of the things that are in the Agile practice guide. So I would take a look at that and be familiar with some of those new terms in there, and to know that Kanban is demand-based scheduling, and I'm not sure how much of that, if they're emerging techniques in the PMBOK guide, so I don't know how much of the more agile and adaptive type questions you might see, but it's definitely a big change in the 6th edition. Has anyone had any, just in your studies for the exam, how much have you gotten into those new areas that are included in the PMBOK guide and in the Agile practice guide? Have you spent a lot of time on those? I'm sure a lot of people encounter a lot of those techniques in the workplace as well. So I see a couple of answers here, not really very little. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Jeremy. You were told in your course that the Agile material would not be present in the test, so that's good. I appreciate that. So that's good information for everyone.
Alex, what do you mean they're common in the workplace for you?
Are you on audio, Alex, or are you able to elaborate?
Yes, I just meant that we have a lot of clients who are making transition to Agile, and I would say even if it's not strongly emphasized on the exam, I would consider it important to start familiarizing yourself as a project manager, because it's really the way a lot of companies are going.
That's definitely good advice. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing in my work, in the projects I'm working on right now, it truly is a blend of Agile, primarily Scrum and Kanban, and then with the big overarching more waterfall type high level schedule. Yeah, that's really good advice.
And I know Jeremy said he was told in his course that it wouldn't be present on the test, but I've actually received the opposite information. I don't think it's prevalent, but I do think that, I mean, it's considered part of the material that's covered on the test. Okay.
Well, that's good information too. So I think we're getting some good input, good feedback from folks that are out there, studying different courses, and yeah, it's all good information.
This is Jeremy. I can just share that I was a bit disappointed that the course that I took did not touch the Agile book at all, and that was with the belief that it was not going to be prevalent enough to spend time on it in the class. I try to weigh that against the fact that the book's provided, therefore it's likely to be on the test, and I'm just spending my own time in that space.
Yeah, I think it's a good call, because a key thing is that this is not a test on the PMBOK guide. It's a test on the whole body of knowledge. So pretty much anything's fair game. I mean, one thing I will mention is, in the scheduling practice standard, and granted, I specialize in scheduling, so I'm not trying to convert the whole world to be just doing only scheduling, but in the scheduling practice standard, they still have all the information about PERT and so forth. So it's still part of the body of knowledge that we probably should be aware of. And I think it sounds like the Agile practice guide is part of the overall body of knowledge.
Yeah, I'm also taking a course which it covers PERT, and it also it does cover Agile, and in particular they said since Scrum is really the most common, that you should have at least a basic understanding of Scrum, because there could be exam questions about that.
Okay, that's good information too. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there's some really good feedback we're seeing here. Thank you, Anna, too, for the feedback.
This discussion benefits everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, what I did was, we had a lot of questions last time that I had accumulated over doing this several times, and I had a lot of questions, and we were really rushing toward the end. So I pared it down a little bit. Here we've kind of wrapped it up a little bit early, so we can certainly go back to any particular topics. I just have one backup slide here, critical path assumptions. One thing to know is a critical path method really assumes unlimited resources, and we're basically looking at single point duration estimates. And to really get better, capturing uncertainty better, is to use, preferably Monte Carlo simulation is a really good way to get better predictive capability out of a network schedule. And we've actually done that before. A project I've worked on, we've gone through schedule risk analysis where we run Monte Carlo simulations. And I mean, there are schedulers, expert schedulers out there, well-respected folks who say that the schedule is not really a schedule unless you're talking about distributions on all your key milestones on a critical path. So that's could touch on some areas in the exam having to do with Monte Carlo simulation. So anyway, let me ask, is there anything anyone wants to go back to? Was there a question that you just want to take another look at? Oh, and yes, from Colleen.
And there's a question about the slides. I guess you saw it.
Yes. Yes, I do see it from Colleen. Are you able to send this as PowerPoint? So, I mean, I'm certainly happy to, I provide it to however Mike and Arpita decide it's going to be distributed, whether through the recording or how you want to distribute it. I'm not sure, but I can certainly provide it to Mike and Arpita, and then you can decide, what's the best way to provide it.
Tim, if you forward them to me, I'll forward them to the participants.
Okay.
So that's okay with you.
Yeah, it's fine with me. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And again, I'm also happy to follow up if anyone has any questions. After this, I'm happy. Please, follow up, and I'll be happy to provide any additional information. But yeah, if there's anything you want to go back to, mention it here in the chat window. We still have a couple minutes left. And thanks for the feedback. Okay, so I'm getting a feedback here. One issue is very confusing, was float and activity. Oh, now it's clear. Okay, great. Really glad. That makes my day. So I'm really glad about that. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. And yeah, if there are any questions you want to revisit, please. Great, thanks. Yeah, please provide anything you want to go back to. Great, thanks, Jackie. Okay,
I
so
would
Mike,
tell everybody that they should
great, thanks, Ricardo.
go back to their prep guides. If, you know, if they've taken a course, and most of them probably have, if they have access to the Rita Mulcahy book or whatever other book, that they tend to go over these functional areas or these knowledge areas in detail as well.
Yes, that's really good. And I don't have the new Rita Mulcahy book, but just make sure you get the 9th edition. That's the one that's in line with the 6th PMBOK guide, and I think that's an excellent one.
And there's a mention about Andy Crow's, and I understand his is very good as well. Does anybody have any questions on preparing for the exam, taking the exam?
This is Brian. Are there any study guides that helped you through the process? Understanding that you did the 5th edition, but
yeah, I actually took a 5-day course back in 2009 with IIL, and I still have the course material. I'm looking at it on my shelf here. That was an excellent course. So yeah, they have some really good material.
Was that Leroy?
Pardon me?
Was that Leroy?
No. Well, gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the instructor's name. He was excellent, and it's been a couple years, so I'm drawing a blank right now. But I'm sure I will remember. But it was an excellent course. I took it in Philadelphia, and it was very good. And I think the Kersner book is a good book. The Rita Mulcahy book obviously is good. And there's other ones out there.
Absolutely.
I also took an Orange Belt Microsoft Project course with IIL, in-person classroom course. That was very good as well.
Thank you.
Are there sites that have? Yes, there are sites. I don't have that information in front of me, but I know that ARPITA has that, and I will make sure that information gets distributed. Good question.
And while we're on the topic of different resources, let me try to find another one here. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, so I have one here that I was just looking at, and you might be able to see the screen now. That is this one here, Tim Heldman, and I got the Kindle version, and it's got links to online tests. The Kindle version was like $33, and it's got tests in the book, and it's also got links to online tests. So seems to be good. So that's just another one that's out there.
Any other questions? I want to tell you guys that the participation's been great. I know that Tim appreciates the feedback and the interaction. It's not a lot of fun to do one of these when there's not the back and forth. That makes it so much more beneficial to the group, and you've been a real active group of participants. Have we gotten someone to volunteer to provide questions for the cost management session? those of you who are still connected, it's important that we provide sample questions for the next session. If some of you can do, I know tomorrow is the 4th of July, but you could pull together a couple sample questions and send them to Carpenter, would be helpful. Tim, I really want to thank you for your for your presentation. You did your usual outstanding job, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to come back and do this again.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for all the great feedback. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoy doing this. I always learn as much as anyone else does, so thank you very much. Really, truly been a pleasure, and thanks, Mike.
Happy 4th of July, everybody, and be careful with those fireworks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.